Deep in Iranian territory, Iraqi armor chalks up fresh successes on the battlefield. For once, an Arab army is inflicting territorial loss on the enemy. The enmity here between Arab and Persian, as old as that between Arab and Jew. A border war that started months ago with fretful skirmishes. A war that no one now seems able to stop. A war that still threatens the world.
From 1980 to 1988, a devastating war was fought between Iran and Iraq. A war so devastating it would cause both combatants over an estimated $1 trillion in financial loss. What makes it even worse is the fact that virtually nothing changed when the conflict finally ended in 1988. There was no reparations, no border changes, just a ceasefire along hundreds of thousands of dead. It only feels as of recent that some people have decided to talk about this war because, well, nobody has talked about it in the past 20 years. Well, until recently it feels. On July the 17th, 1968, there was a coup that happened in Iraq. Led by Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr, his Iraqi Ba'ath Party would seize power, placing himself as president and Saddam Hussein as vice president. Over the course of the next decade, Saddam would accumulate a lot of political power within Iraq.
The face of the man who took the Iraqi people to war gazes out from posters all over Baghdad. Saddam Hussein al-Takriti, president in name for the past 14 months, but Iraq's strongman for the past decade. Variously attired in bespoke lounge suit, or as popular hero in Arab headdress, or in the uniform of a field marshal, although he was never a soldier, sometimes depicted as the sweaty labourer with shovel to hand, but his favourite image, the cuddly father figure.
Saddam would eventually become president in 1979, and the Ba'ath Party would suffer a major purge. Hundreds of Ba'ath Party members were executed in a bid for power. Despite Saddam's seizure of power, there was still much problems for Iraq internally. Saddam's government was Sunni, while the majority of the Iraqi population were Shia. Saddam's party was also well known for their Arab nationalism. The only problem with that is that significant portions of the population of Iraq were not Arab. Most notably, the Kurds in northern Iraq repeatedly fought against a Ba'ath government. Despite these internal setbacks, Saddam's government maintained authority. Around the same time in Iran in 1978 to 1979, a revolution took place that overthrew the government of the Pahlavi dynasty. Iran's leader, the Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, was seen as a common enemy by the Iraqi government. Pahlavi's government heavily aligned with the Western Bloc during the Cold War. The United States, of course, was a huge international backer for the Shah, which included millions upon millions of dollars in US weapons. The Shah's rule of Iran would of course end in 1979 when his government was successfully overthrown, establishing the Islamic Republic of Iran, headed by the Ayatollah or Supreme Leader Ruhollah Khomeini. The sudden result of the revolution naturally alarmed Saddam's government. Since I mentioned earlier that the majority of the population of Iraq was Shia, and the Islamic Republic of Iran was obviously a Shia theocratic government, this might have presented a small threat to Saddam's government. This is also on top of the fact that there was a long-running history of territorial border disputes between Iran and Iraq, such as the Shatt al-Arab dispute, which took place from 1936 all the way till 1975. However, it came to the point in 1980 where Saddam decided to invade Iran. It's widely accepted that one of Saddam's major goals for the war was to capture the province of Khuzestan in Iran. Saddam's government was hoping that the substantial Arab population of Khuzestan would support him. Saddam, of course, would publicly deny this motivation, but it is generally accepted that Saddam was looking to take advantage of Iran's chaos. Even before the war started in late September of 1980, there was already border conflicts where Iraq was forcibly reclaiming territories in Zain al-Qaz and Saif Saad. Due to this aggression, both Iran and Iraq declared the Treaty of 1975, or referred to as the Algiers Agreement, was now null and void. The Iraqi full-scale invasion would then commence on September the 22nd, 1980. Now, over the course of the first 3 months of the war, the Iraqi military did gain ground, but by December of the same year, the invasion had effectively stalled. The Iranian military was able to regroup, and they basically took back all of the gains that the Iraqis took by 1982. The hopeful decisive victory over Iran that Iraq was hoping for evaporated pretty quickly. The war would then carry on for another 6 years, with both states trading blows against each other. It would get to the point where the Iranians would counter-invade into Iraq. However, Iraqi counteroffensives would ultimately push them out later in 1988. And of course, again, it is worthy to note that basically nothing really changed as a result of the war. I already mentioned the fact that hundreds of thousands died, and the financial loss for both states was absolutely immense. It's also worthy of note that Iraq, as a result of the war, also owed a ton of money to the state of Kuwait, which would lead into something else that we're not going to talk about today. The war, of course, was also known for its sheer brutality and war crimes. The Iraqi military infamously used tons of chemical weapons on Iranian military targets as well as civilians.
The prospect of Basra being cut off eventually panicked Iraqi leaders into widespread use of chemical weapons. Iranian gas masks afforded little protection, and chemical weapons, more than any other Iraqi ordnance, were responsible for extensive Iranian battlefield casualties. Mustard gas and nerve agents were delivered by small, innocent-looking planes based near Baghdad. ITN's cameras were prevented from filming more of them. At first, the scale of its use surprised the Iranians, who were forbidden by Ayatollah Khomeini from following suit. In contrast, the chemicals that injured these people had been developed in Iraq under Saddam Hussein's personal supervision. At first, the world ignored the evidence, but in time, chemicals would be used in a manner that would shock international opinion.
Among those chemical weapons used by the Iraqi military, most of them were known as neurotoxin or nerve agents like tabun, sarin, and mustard gas. Yeah, there's a pretty good reason why these would be considered war crimes among the international community. Now, as I mentioned, the Iraqi military also used chemical weapons against Iranian civilians. At bare minimum, 30 attacks have been recorded on Iranian civilians. Not only that, there were many civilians within Iraq that were affected by these attacks as well, most notoriously in the Halabja massacre. The Iraqi government used tons of mustard gas and other nerve agents against Kurdish civilians. This resulted in up to 5,000 people being killed, injuring 7,000 to 10,000 more, and resulting in more pain and suffering with the people who were affected years ahead of time. However, just because Iraq was criticized widely for its use of chemical weapons doesn't mean Iran will get off easy either. The Iranian military, of course, used human wave tactics in Operation Ramadan and many other sectors, and infamously used child soldiers. So yeah, you could probably imagine that being a child within the state of Iran being thrown into a modern World War I type of war where basically nothing happened because both sides threw so much shit at each other that nothing came of it. Yeah, extremely depressing. Oh yeah, mentioning World War I, yeah, this was basically modern World War I, which means yes, both sides were effectively using large trench networks, bayonet charges, machine gun nests, you know, the typical tactics used in 1914 that were being actively used in the 1980s. As you could probably imagine, 8 years of this kind of combat would lead to this many dead. Now this of course leads into the spiciest part of discussing the war, and that was the huge amount of foreign support given to both sides.
I asked the Iraqi foreign minister what he had to say to the big powers.
There is one thing that we would like to say to the big powers. That is not to interfere in the area in any way, to keep away. Not to interfere directly or indirectly. This has been always what we wanted from the big powers.
Are you confident that Iraq and the smaller Arab countries in the Gulf will be able, though, to maintain security for what are, after all, vital interests, vital economic interests for the West?
Yes, definitely. After all, who is threatening our independence? If it is a country in the region, we should be able to deal with that. But if it is a big power coming and interfering in the area, then the other big power would use that as a pretext for its own interference, and we get in the vicious circle.
Most countries, including the United States and the Soviet Union, sought to support Iraq because they viewed Saddam Hussein's government as a good counterbalance to Iran's revolution. As a result of this, states like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Kuwait gave Saddam's government billions of dollars in loans. The United States, on the other hand, is a little bit more complicated because despite giving Iraq billions of dollars in economic aid, as well as military intelligence and also some dual-use technology, it's kind of pulled a little bit of a sneaky one with the Iran-Contra affair.
Let's start with the part that is the most controversial. A few months ago, I told the American people I did not trade arms for hostages. My heart and my best intentions still tell me that's true, but the facts and the evidence tell me it is not.
Bitch, what?
You see, the Reagan administration not only was backing Saddam Hussein, but was also secretly selling weapons to the Iranian government. To those of you who need the background on this one, the country of Iran was subject to an arms embargo by the United States at the time. In 1979, Iranian students stormed the US embassy in Tehran and took 52 Americans hostage. After this had happened, the president at the time, Jimmy Carter, imposed an arms embargo, so any sales of arms to Iran would have been considered illegal. The Reagan administration secretly sold arms to Iran anyways in order to fund the Contras. The weapons, of course, would be exchanged for hostages that were being held by Hezbollah. And mentioning the Contras, because of course I have to, the Reagan administration really wanted to fund them, and yeah, they were not great people. Sometimes terror is very productive. It's okay, guys, it's okay when we fund terrorism. Yeah, if you look into the little details of everything, it gets really confusing, like how Spain gave weapons to both sides. The UK was actively giving chemicals to Saddam Hussein to make chemical weapons, while also simultaneously giving chemical weapons defense equipment to Iran. It makes zero sense. And yes, you see this correctly, Israel was supporting Iran. What a fucking world we live in right now. Now, if I were to go into detail about all of this, I would probably be sitting here for the next couple hours, but I don't think that's really necessary. But yes, all of this massive support for both sides ended up accumulating in pretty much nothing. Hell, I'd argue that this massive proxy war, as I'm pretty much just going to refer to it as, led to many of the conditions that the Middle East faces today, including Saddam Hussein's motivation to invade Kuwait, starting the Gulf War. As for Iran, the revolution remained intact, and the war left the Islamic Republic in the same political state that it is today. The conclusion to the conflict feels just very weird and ironic, I guess, considering the relations that Saddam Hussein would have with the West later on, as well as the relations with Iran and the West later on. It's just, wow, a lot of this just has not aged very well, has it? I mean, come on. I mean, when would the US ever back any political faction that would bite them later in the ass? But yeah, looking into this war a little bit more for historical perspective was pretty awful. Seeing the amount of reports that were made concerning chemical attacks and human wave attacks and the use of child soldiers, it's just not very great to look through. Anyhow, this was my first attempt at covering a historical topic. Of course, this was requested by Gas Mask, so thank you for the donation that was made a while ago for a PC build that I should have delivered on a while ago, but sorry about that. Anyhow, I might try my hand more at this kind of content, so I guess I'll see what I do next time.